The harsh April wind of 1875 whipped across the empty train platform in Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory. As Josephine Ellis clutched her single trunk and stared in disbelief at the man who had just shattered her future. Her chestnut hair escaped its pins, lashing across her tear-stained face as she struggled to comprehend the cruel words still hanging in the air. "I ain't taking no mail-order bride, not one that looks like you, but your letters." "The agreement," Josephine stammered, her gloved hand trembling as she reached into her reticule to retrieve the stack of correspondence that had brought her 2,000 miles from Boston. "You promised, don't matter what I promised," Edgar Finch spat, his weathered face contorted with disgust as he looked her up and down. "I asked for a sturdy woman to help with the farm. You're nothing but skin and bones, wouldn't last a week out here." 3 months of letters, promises of a new beginning, of respect if not love all lies. Josephine had spent her last dollars on the train ticket west, selling her mother's silver hairbrush to cover the final leg of the journey. At 22, with no family left in Boston after the fever took her parents, this was to be her salvation. "Please," she whispered, dignity fracturing, "I have nowhere to go." Edgar turned his back, mounting his horse. "Not my problem, miss. Silver Creek's got a decent hotel." "Maybe they need a maid." With that, he spurred his horse and rode away, leaving her alone as the train huffed and prepared to continue its journey westward. The station master, an elderly man with kind eyes, approached hesitantly. "Miss, train's heading out soon. You staying or going?" Josephine swallowed hard, fighting back tears. I suppose I'm staying." Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. The old man nodded sympathetically. "Town's just down that road, hotel's not far, but it'll be a hard walk with that trunk." She gazed down the dusty road, the small cluster of buildings that made up Silver Creek seeming impossibly distant. The afternoon sun was already beginning its descent, painting long shadows across the platform. With a deep breath, she grabbed the handle of her trunk and began to drag it toward the steps. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn. A rider was approaching at a gallop, dust billowing behind him. As he drew closer, Josephine could make out a tall figure on a chestnut stallion, his face obscured by the wide brim of his hat. The horse slowed to a stop at the platform, and the rider dismounted in a fluid motion that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He removed his hat, revealing dark blonde hair and piercing blue eyes set in a sun-bronzed face. "I'm terribly sorry I'm late," he said, his voice deep and tinged with concern. The creek was higher than expected after the spring thaw. His gaze took in her tear-streaked face, the trunk at her feet, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "You wouldn't happen to be waiting for someone, would you, miss?" "I was," Josephine replied, her voice barely audible, "but he's gone now." The stranger's jaw tightened as he looked in the direction Edgar had departed. "Finch," she nodded, surprised. "You know him?" "Everyone knows Edgar Finch," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a compliment. "I'm Daniel Xavier, have a ranch about 10 miles south of here." He extended a calloused hand, which she tentatively accepted. "And you would be?" Josephine Ellis, from Boston. Understanding flickered across his features. "Mail-order bride," she nodded, shame heating her cheeks. Daniel replaced his hat, studying her for a long moment. "Miss Ellis, I don't mean to be forward, but night's coming and Silver Creek's not the safest place for a lady alone. I've got a wagon in town and a spare room at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, is there proper as they come. I'd be happy to take you home with me until you sort out your situation." Josephine hesitated, years of proper Boston upbringing warring with her desperate circumstances. "I couldn't possibly impose. It's no imposition," Daniel insisted. "In fact, if you're handy with a needle and thread or know your way around a kitchen, Mrs. Holloway could use the help. She's getting on in years." It wasn't the future she'd imagined, but it was a roof and perhaps honest work. Josephine nodded slowly. "I would be most grateful, Mr. Xavier." Daniel smiled, the expression transforming his rugged features. "Let's get your trunk then. My wagon's at the general store." As they walked toward town, Josephine carrying her small handbag while Daniel easily managed her trunk, she found herself studying her unexpected rescuer. He was tall and lean, but the way he carried her heavy trunk suggested considerable strength. His clothes were worn but clean: a simple cotton shirt, leather vest, and denim trousers tucked into well-used boots. "Have you lived in Silver Creek long, Mr. Xavier?" she asked, attempting polite conversation. "Call me Daniel, please, and yes, about 8 years now. Came out after the war with nothing but my horse and a dream of open spaces." He glanced at her. "What brought you to answer Finch's advertisement, if you don't mind my asking?" Josephine hesitated, then decided honesty was the simplest path. "My parents died last year, influenza. I worked as a school teacher, but when the school closed." She swallowed hard. There weren't many options for a woman alone. Daniel nodded, his expression somber. "I'm sorry about your parents. The West can be hard, but it's also a place for new beginnings." They reached the general store where Daniel's wagon waited, a sturdy vehicle with a team of 2 bay horses. He loaded her trunk into the back, then helped her onto the wooden seat before climbing up beside her. "It's a bit of a rough ride," he warned as he took up the reins. "Roads still muddy from the spring rains." The wagon rumbled through Silver Creek, a collection of wooden buildings lining a single main street. Men in dusty clothes and women in plain dresses turned to observe the passing wagon, curious about the unfamiliar woman with Daniel Xavier. "Don't mind the stairs," Daniel said quietly. "News travels fast here, and new faces are rare." As they left town behind, the landscape opened up into rolling prairie dotted with sagebrush and clusters of pine trees. In the distance, mountains rose majestically against the darkening sky. "It's beautiful," Josephine breathed, momentarily forgetting her troubles. Daniel smiled. "That it is, different from Boston, I imagine, entirely. There's so much space. That's what I love about it, room to breathe, room to be whoever you want to be." They fell into comfortable silence as the wagon followed a winding trail through the prairie. Josephine found herself relaxing slightly, the rhythmic motion of the wagon and the spectacular scenery easing some of her anxiety. After about an hour, Daniel pointed ahead. "There it is, Xavier Ranch." A neat collection of buildings came into view: a modest 2-story house built of solid timber, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the lush spring grass. "It's not much," Daniel said, a hint of pride in his voice, "but it's mine, paid for every acre with my own sweat." "It's wonderful," Josephine replied honestly. Compared to the cramped apartment she'd shared with 3 other teachers in Boston, the ranch seemed palatial. As they approached, the front door of the house opened, and an elderly woman in a plain dress and apron emerged, shading her eyes against the setting sun. "That's Mrs. Holloway," Daniel explained. "Best cook in the territory and stubborn as a mule." He brought the wagon to a halt before the house and jumped down, coming around to help Josephine descend. Mrs. Holloway approached, curiosity evident in her lined face. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Miss Josephine Ellis from Boston. She'll be staying with us for a while." "Miss Ellis, Mrs. Martha Holloway, my housekeeper, and the reason I haven't starved to death these past 5 years." The older woman's eyes softened as she took in Josephine's travel-worn appearance. "Welcome, Miss Ellis. You look dead on your feet. Come inside and I'll fix you something to eat." "Thank you," Josephine said gratefully. "And please call me Josephine." "I'll bring in your trunk," Daniel offered, already lifting it from the wagon. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable: solid furniture, clean floors, and curtains at the windows that softened the rustic feel. Mrs. Holloway led Josephine to a small bedroom on the first floor. "This was meant for guests, though we don't get many," the housekeeper explained. "Bathrooms down the hall. We've got indoor plumbing, which is more than most around here can say. Mr. Xavier insisted on it." "It's lovely," Josephine said sincerely, taking in the iron bedstead with its patchwork quilt and the small dresser with a mirror above it. Daniel appeared in the doorway with her trunk. "I hope you'll be comfortable here, Miss Ellis." "Josephine, please, and thank you. Your kindness is unexpected." A shadow crossed his face. What Finch did wasn't right. No gentleman would leave a lady stranded like that. Mrs. Holloway made a dismissive noise. "Edgar Finch is no gentleman, never has been." She turned to Josephine. You wash up, dear. Dinner will be ready in half an hour. Left alone, Josephine sank onto the bed, the events of the day crashing over her. She allowed herself a moment of tears for her lost hopes, for the humiliation of being rejected, for the uncertainty of her future. Then, with a deep breath, she rose and began to unpack the necessities from her trunk. After washing away the dust of travel, Josephine changed into a simple blue dress, one of only 3 she owned, and made her way to the dining room. Daniel and Mrs. Holloway were already seated at a sturdy oak table, a savory-smelling stew steaming in the center. Just in time, Mrs. Holloway said approvingly. Sit down before it gets cold. The meal was simple but delicious beef stew with fresh bread and butter, followed by apple pie that melted in Josephine's mouth. The conversation flowed easily, with Daniel explaining the workings of the ranch and Mrs. Holloway occasionally interjecting with her own observations. Tomorrow I can show you around properly, Daniel offered as they finished their pie. Unless you'd prefer to rest after your journey. I'd like to see the ranch, Josephine replied, and perhaps discuss how I might earn my keep while I'm here. Daniel and Mrs. Holloway exchanged a glance. No rush on that, he said, but Mrs. Holloway has been saying she could use help with the mending and such. My eyes aren't what they used to be, the older woman admitted, and these men tear through clothes like they're made of paper. I'm quite skilled with a needle, Josephine offered, and I can cook, though perhaps not to your standards, Mrs. Holloway smiled. We'll find plenty for you to do, don't you worry. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Josephine listened to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, so different from the constant noise of Boston. Instead of carriages and voices, she heard the low mooing of cattle, the occasional whinny of a horse, and the whisper of wind through the pine trees outside her window. Despite the trauma of the day, she felt an unexpected sense of peace. Daniel Xavier had shown her more kindness in a few hours than Edgar Finch had in months of correspondence. She fell asleep wondering about the quiet rancher with the kind eyes and strong hands. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee and bacon. Josephine dressed quickly in her most practical outfit, a brown skirt and white blouse, and made her way to the kitchen where Mrs. Holloway was frying eggs. Good morning, dear. Sleep well. Better than I expected, Josephine admitted. Can I help with breakfast? Set the table if you like. Mr. Xavier's been up since dawn, checking on a new calf. He'll be in shortly, hungry as a bear. As if summoned by her words, the back door opened, and Daniel entered, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. His face brightened when he saw Josephine. Good morning, Miss Ellis. Josephine. I trust you slept well. Very well, thank you. Breakfast was a hearty affair: eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy, and strong coffee. Daniel ate with the appetite of a man who'd already put in several hours of work. I thought I'd show you around this morning, he said between bites. Give you a feel for the place. After breakfast, they set out on foot, Daniel pointing out the various buildings and explaining their purposes. The barn housed not only horses but also equipment for the ranch. A smaller building served as a smokehouse, another as storage for grain and feed. The cattle range on about 500 acres, Daniel explained as they walked toward a fenced pasture where several dozen cows grazed. Not the biggest spread in the territory, but enough to make a decent living. Do you manage it all yourself? Josephine asked, impressed by the scope of the operation. I have 2 hands who help, brothers Tom and Jack Miller, good workers. They live in the bunkhouse over there. He pointed to a small cabin near the corral, and Mrs. Holloway, of course. Couldn't run this place without her. As they walked, Josephine noticed Daniel occasionally glancing at her, as if gauging her reaction to his home. She made sure to express her genuine admiration for what he had built. It's remarkable what you've accomplished, she said as they returned to the house. Especially coming west with nothing. A flush of pleasure colored his tanned cheeks. It's been hard work, but worth every drop of sweat. He hesitated, then added, I hope you'll be comfortable here, Josephine. At least until you decide what's next for you. You've been more than generous, she assured him, and I intend to earn my keep. Over the next few days, Josephine fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She helped Mrs. Holloway with meals and tackled a substantial pile of mending that had accumulated over the winter. The work was satisfying, giving her a sense of purpose she had feared lost after Finch's rejection. She also began to notice things about Daniel Xavier, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, how he always thanked Mrs. Holloway for every meal, the gentle way he spoke to his horses. He was unfailingly polite to Josephine, maintaining a respectful distance while ensuring she had everything she needed. A week after her arrival, Daniel found her on the front porch, enjoying the late afternoon sun while darning a sock. "I'm heading into town tomorrow for supplies," he said, leaning against the porch railing. "I thought you might like to come along. Mrs. Holloway has a list as long as my arm." Josephine hesitated. Will Mr. Finch be there?" Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "Possibly. But you needn't worry about him. In fact, I'd like to see him try to cause trouble." The protective note in his voice sent a pleasant warmth through Josephine. "Then yes, I'd like to come. Thank you." The next morning, they set out in the wagon, the spring day bright and clear. Josephine wore her best dress, a green calico with white trim, and had arranged her hair carefully. If she were to face the man who had humiliated her, she would do so looking her best. The ride to town was pleasant, Daniel pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. He was easy to talk to, Josephine discovered, knowledgeable about everything from weather patterns to local history. Silver Creek looked different in the bright morning light, less intimidating than it had upon her arrival. They stopped first at the general store, where Daniel introduced Josephine to the proprietor, Mr. Wilson. "Miss Ellis is staying at my ranch for a while," he explained, his tone neutral but his eyes challenging anyone to comment inappropriately. Mr. Wilson merely nodded and smiled. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Ellis. We're always glad to see new faces." As Daniel consulted Mrs. Holloway's list, Josephine wandered the store, admiring the variety of goods, everything from fabric and buttons to tools and cookware. She was examining a display of ribbons when the bell over the door jingled. Edgar Finch stood in the doorway, his narrow face registering shock when he saw Josephine. His surprise quickly turned to a sneer. Well, didn't expect to see you still around." "Thought you'd have taken the next train east." Josephine straightened her spine, determined not to show weakness. "Good morning, Mr. Finch." Daniel appeared at her side, his presence solid and reassuring. "Finch," he acknowledged coldly. Edgar's eyes darted between them, a nasty smile spreading across his face. "I see how it is. Xavier's taken you in, always did have a soft spot for strays." Daniel took a step forward, his voice low. "You do well to watch your tongue, Finch. Miss Ellis is a guest in my home and deserves your respect." "Respect?" Edgar scoffed. "For a woman desperate enough to marry a stranger." Before Daniel could respond, Josephine placed a hand on his arm. "It's all right," she said quietly, then turned to Edgar. "Yes, Mr. Finch, I was desperate enough to agree to marry a stranger, a mistake I'm grateful to have avoided." She smiled sweetly. "Good day to you." She turned her back on him, heart pounding but head high. Daniel gave Edgar one last warning look before following Josephine to another part of the store. "I'm sorry about that," he said softly. "Don't be. I needed to face him eventually." She managed a small smile, and it wasn't as terrible as I feared. Daniel's admiration was evident in his eyes. "You're a brave woman, Josephine Ellis." They completed their shopping without further incident, though Josephine was aware of curious glances from townsfolk they encountered. Daniel seemed unbothered, introducing her simply as Miss Ellis from Boston without elaboration. Their last stop was at the post office where Daniel checked for mail. To Josephine's surprise, there was a letter for her. "It's from the school board in Silver Creek," the postmaster explained. "Been waiting for you." Puzzled, Josephine opened the letter while Daniel loaded their purchases into the wagon. It was a brief note from the chairman of the local school board, inquiring if she would be interested in interviewing for the position of schoolteacher. The previous teacher had departed unexpectedly, and they had heard from the station master that she had teaching experience. "Good news?" Daniel asked, noting her expression. "They want me to interview for the teaching position here in Silver Creek," she said, still stunned. How did they know? Daniel smiled. Small towns have a way of spreading information, and good teachers are hard to come by out here. Hope bloomed in Josephine's chest. A teaching position would mean independence, a chance to build a life here rather than returning east in defeat. Would you mind if I stopped at the chairman's house? His address is here. I'd like to speak with him right away. Of course not. The school board chairman, Mr. Peterson, was delighted to meet Josephine and impressed by her credentials. The interview was brief but thorough, and by the end, he had offered her the position. We can provide a small cabin behind the schoolhouse, he explained. It's modest, but it's yours with the position. School starts in 2 weeks. Josephine could hardly contain her excitement as they rode back to the ranch. I can't believe my good fortune, she told Daniel. To think if Mr. Finch had met me at the station as planned, I might never have had this opportunity. Daniel smiled, though there was a hint of something else in his expression. I'm happy for you, Josephine. You'll make a fine teacher for Silver Creek. That evening at dinner, Josephine shared her news with Mrs. Holloway, who clapped her hands in delight. How wonderful. Though we'll miss you around here, the older woman added, you've been a tremendous help. I don't leave for 2 weeks, Josephine reminded her, and I'll still be just in town. I can visit. Daniel was quieter than usual during the meal, and afterward Josephine found him on the porch, staring at the stars. Is everything all right? She asked, joining him at the railing. Just thinking, he replied. After a moment he added, I'm truly happy about your teaching position, Josephine. It's a perfect fit for you. But, she prompted, sensing his reservation. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. But I've grown accustomed to having you here. The ranch feels more like a home with you in it. Josephine's heart quickened. Daniel. I know it's too soon, he said quickly. You've only been here a week, and after what happened with Finch, I understand if you're cautious about entanglements. It's not that, she assured him. I've enjoyed being here with you and Mrs. Holloway, but I need to stand on my own feet. I came west to start a new life, not to simply transfer my dependence from one person to another. Daniel nodded slowly. I respect that, truly. He hesitated, then added, would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you once you're settled in town? The warmth that had been growing in Josephine's heart spread through her entire body. I would like that very much. The next 2 weeks passed quickly. Josephine divided her time between helping at the ranch and preparing for her new position. Daniel took her to see the schoolhouse and teacher's cabin, both simple but sound structures. They worked together to clean and repair the cabin, which had stood empty for several months. During those days of shared labor, their conversations deepened. Daniel told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his service in the Union Army during the Civil War, and his journey west seeking peace and purpose. Josephine shared stories of her parents, her love of teaching, and her dreams for the future. Each day, Josephine found herself more drawn to the quiet rancher with his gentle strength and unwavering integrity. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her pulse race, but he maintained a respectful distance, true to his word about waiting until she was established in her own home. The night before Josephine was to move to town, Mrs. Holloway prepared a special dinner roast beef with all the trimmings and a chocolate cake for dessert. Even the Miller brothers were invited to join them, making for a festive atmosphere around the table. After dinner, Daniel asked Josephine if she would join him for a walk. The evening was mild, with a crescent moon providing just enough light to see by. I have something for you, he said as they strolled toward the corral, a going-away present of sorts. Daniel, you've already done so much. This is something practical, he assured her. Living in town, you'll need a way to get around. They reached the corral, where a pretty little mare with a white blaze on her forehead stood waiting, already saddled. This is Daisy, Daniel said, stroking the horse's neck. She's gentle but sure-footed, perfect for a lady rider. Josephine was speechless, tears pricking her eyes. I can't accept such a gift. You can and you will, Daniel insisted gently. Consider it a loan if that makes you more comfortable, but you'll need transportation, and I'd rest easier knowing you had a reliable mount. Touched beyond words, Josephine reached out to pat Daisy's velvety nose. She's beautiful, thank you. Would you like to try her out? There's still enough light for a short ride. With Daniel's help, Josephine mounted the mare, adjusting her skirts as best she could. Daniel swung up onto his own horse and they set off at a gentle pace, following a trail that wound through a stand of pines before emerging onto an open meadow. They rode in companionable silence, the only sounds the soft thud of hooves on earth and the evening calls of birds settling for the night. When they reached the crest of a small hill, Daniel halted his horse, and Josephine did the same. Below them stretched the Xavier Ranch, peaceful in the gathering dusk. Beyond it, the lights of Silver Creek twinkled in the distance. "It's beautiful," Josephine said softly. "Yes, it is." But when she turned, Daniel was looking at her, not the view. In the fading light, his eyes were intense, searching hers with a question he hadn't yet asked aloud. "Josephine," he began, his voice low, "I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel as though I've been waiting for you my whole life. These past 2 weeks have been the happiest I can remember." Her heart pounding, Josephine could only nod in agreement. "I understand your need for independence," Daniel continued. "I admire it, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are genuine and deep. When the time is right, if that time comes, I hope you might consider a future together." Josephine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Daniel, when I came west, I was willing to marry a man I knew only through letters, out of desperation and hope for a better life. Now, I find myself falling in love with a man I've come to know and respect, a man who saw me at my lowest moment and offered kindness without expectation." She smiled tremulously. "The time will come, I'm certain of it, but I need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own first." Daniel's face broke into a radiant smile. "That's all I needed to hear." He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "May I court you properly, Miss Ellis, with your permission?" "You have my permission, Mr. Xavier," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. They rode back to the ranch as the stars began to appear, a new understanding between them that needed no further words. The next morning, Daniel helped Josephine load her trunk into his wagon for the journey to town. Mrs. Holloway hugged her goodbye, extracting a promise that she would come for Sunday dinner whenever possible. Daisy was tethered to the back of the wagon, ready to become Josephine's loyal companion. The ride to Silver Creek was filled with practical discussions about the coming school term and Josephine's preparations, but underneath ran a current of awareness, of possibilities waiting to unfold. When they reached the teacher's cabin, Daniel carried Josephine's trunk inside, then hesitated at the door. "You'll be all right here?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I'll be fine," she assured him, "and I know where to find you if I need anything." He nodded, then reached for her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that sent warmth rushing through her. "Until Sunday dinner, then." "Until Sunday," she echoed. As promised, Daniel called on Josephine regularly in the weeks that followed. He escorted her to church on Sundays, followed by dinner at the ranch. Sometimes they rode together in the countryside surrounding Silver Creek, Josephine growing more confident on Daisy with each outing. The school term began, and Josephine threw herself into teaching with enthusiasm. The children of Silver Creek, 23 in all, ranging from 6 to 16, responded well to her firm but kind approach. Parents expressed their appreciation for her dedication, and even Edgar Finch, whose nephew was in her class, grudgingly acknowledged her skill at a school board meeting. As spring gave way to summer, Josephine's feelings for Daniel deepened. Their courtship progressed with proper decorum but increasing warmth. Their first kiss came on a sunny June afternoon during a picnic by the creek that gave the town its name, a gentle, questioning touch that soon became more assured as Josephine responded with equal fervor. By midsummer, Josephine had become a respected member of the Silver Creek community. She had friends among the other women in town, particularly the minister's wife, who invited her to join a sewing circle. Her students were making excellent progress, and the school board had already asked her to return for the following term. On a warm August evening, Daniel invited Josephine for a special dinner at the ranch. Mrs. Holloway had outdone herself, preparing all of Josephine's favorite dishes and disappearing discreetly after serving dessert. They sat on the porch afterward, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Daniel seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous. "Is everything all right?" Josephine asked, concerned. He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Everything is perfect, actually. But there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Josephine's heart began to race as Daniel slid from his chair to one knee before her. "Josephine Ellis, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought joy and meaning to each day, and I can no longer imagine a future without you in it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Inside the box was a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. Josephine gasped, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Daniel, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms. Their kiss was tender and full of promise, sealing a love that had grown from an unexpected act of kindness into something deep and enduring. They were married in October, when the cottonwood trees along the creek had turned to gold. The ceremony was held in the small church in Silver Creek, with seemingly the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Holloway cried happy tears throughout, and even the Miller brothers cleaned up nicely for the occasion. Josephine continued teaching through the fall term, riding Daisy to and from the ranch each day. When winter made the journey impractical, Daniel built in addition to the ranch house a small classroom where Josephine could teach the children from neighboring ranches 3 days a week. As she settled into her new life as Mrs. Xavier, Josephine often reflected on the twist of fate that had brought her to this happiness. Had Edgar Finch met her at the station as planned, she would have been trapped in a loveless marriage with a cruel man. Instead, she had found true love with a man whose kindness and integrity matched his strength. 1 year to the day after Daniel had first found her weeping at the train station, Josephine shared news that made him whoop with joy and swing her in a circle right in the middle of the kitchen. She was expecting their first child. "Are you happy, truly happy?" Daniel asked that night as they lay together, his hand gently caressing her still flat stomach. Josephine smiled in the darkness, thinking of the long journey that had brought her to this moment. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she replied, nestling closer to the man who had offered to take her home and had, in doing so, given her the greatest gift of all, a love to last a lifetime.